G'day ladies and gentlemen, my name's Isaac Butterfield and this is a brand new series called Madness. On this podcast we are looking at talking to some of the people who are involved in some of the maddest, the strangest, the most difficult conversations that are being had right now. And today's episode is no different. We talk to Peter Boghossian. He is a former professor, I guess he still is a professor. He is a former professor from Portland State University who came under enormous amounts of fire because of his beliefs, because of his ability to think critically. And I guess that's what this podcast series is all about. Why are we facing so many challenges when it comes to talking to people about what we believe or things we want to say? That's what this is about. And this is my chat with Peter Boghossian.
Hey, Isaac.
Hey, mate, how are you?
Bro, can you hear me all right?
I can, perfectly. What's happening?
I'm just living my dream, baby. I'm just living my dream. I was watching some of your videos. Super funny.
Thank you, brother.
Well, I was going to say, where in Australia are you?
So I'm in Newcastle, which is about 2 hours north of Sydney.
Yeah, I went there. Russell Blackford edited my last book. He lives there. I love Australia. My buddy Reed and I just did videos there with the Common Ground people, where we went outside we went outside. We did street epistemology, where I put the exercise, where I put everything on the lines. Yeah, so we were there. I love it. I've always had a genuine fondness. I don't know. First of all, the coffee is unbelievable, and the city, it's just so. I was struck because right from Australia, we flew to London. I lived in Australia for a month, and in London for a month, and I was just so struck by. And my son visited me in London. Two things. One, how nice everybody treated the Commons. Like, everybody treated the Commons well. I was in New York City. I was on Gutfeld, and I hadn't been in New York City in a long time, and so sometimes the phones don't work. And I was looking at the train lines, and it was crazy. I was just like watching people jump over the turnstiles, and I was just so struck by that everywhere I went. So I thought it was, well, maybe he put me up in a hotel here, so maybe they're just no, they were doing it everywhere. And then when I went to England, I told my buddy Andrew Doyle, I don't know if you know who he is. I'm like, dude, I can't believe this. I've been in London for weeks now. I've never seen a single person jump the turnstile. Like, literally not one person in 2 weeks. And I was riding it 6, 7, 8, maybe 8 times a day, taking it everywhere. And he said, I've been here for decades. I've never seen anybody jump the turnstile. So there's something about the way that the Commons is treated in America that's very demeaning and degrading. And I don't know if it's a kind of hyper individuality or what it is, but it's pronounced and conspicuous.
Do you think it's a population thing? Like in Melbourne, for example, I don't know how many people are in Melbourne. Let's say 6, 7 million, or no, not in Melbourne, but around that area. There's probably 2, 3 million, maybe something like that. There's not that many people. And then you get to New York, and it's unbelievable how many people are there. It's confronting in such a small area. Like, the population density is so massive that people just don't care. They will react however they want to people. They will flaunt the rules. They will do this. They will do that, because human life matters less when there's more people around, perhaps.
Yeah, it could be the anonymity of it, and it could be that human life matters less, but there has to be a cultural component as well, because in China, like when I was in Shanghai or Beijing, I mean, that place is just, holy, I don't know if I can swear or not, but holy shoot, God, I can swear, holy shit. So that place, like, the density is this crazy, and yet I don't know if they have a respect for the Commons or a fear of some kind of the consequences of authoritarianism. Like, I don't know what it is, but there have to be cultural and maybe even technological factors at play as well. But there is something about that's just so obvious to me that ours is an empire in decline.
We don't, like, in Australia, we don't really fuck with police in the same way that I feel a lot of Americans do. And I'll put it like this. When I was growing up, I was terrified of doing the wrong thing around my parents. Now, I have 4 younger brothers. As they progressively got... I got older and moved out. They were the ones who were running around the house. The type of discipline changed, and they were no longer scared of my parents. I feel like America is Australia's big brother in that respect, where Australia is America's... I'm getting lost in this, but trust me, it'll make sense. Australia is still terrified of Big Brother, of the people, the powers that be, and it seems like Americans just aren't. I mean, there's places throughout the states where you can, if you only steal, I think it's like $900 worth, you're not going to go to jail. You can basically get away with whatever. Whereas in Australia, you will go to jail, you will be prosecuted, and all those things will still happen, and we are still scared. I don't know if it's Australia's always a few years behind America, so hopefully it doesn't follow suit. But perhaps it's something to do with that. And culturally, it is this fuck the police attitude that has gotten to the point where they just don't care. They're not worried. They're not scared. The police don't have any power, so they'll just flaunt. They'll do whatever.
It's just that's so crazy to me on so many levels. I just moved out of Portland. Portland is just a sewer. The crime, the violence, just a cesspool of violence and crime. Although I will say it's gotten significantly better in spite of local governance, not because of it. But one of the things that's been fascinating is that with the decline of the police presence, the murder rate has gone up, and the murder rate isn't going up against people like me, like white middle-aged dudes. It's African Americans, a term, in other words, black people, young black males in particular. I was at a restaurant a while ago. I was outside, and some completely deranged homeless guy was smashing the windows of cars. And then he came up to the table. We were outside. He came up to the table next to me, and there were 3 women at the table. And clearly these were social justice warriors. They had the hair, they had the looks, they had the little pins on the, and they were looking terrified. And so this guy was just, taking food off. I mean, he was completely out of his mind. And so after that was over, I'm going to say this and you're going to think, oh my God, what a complete asshole this guy is. But I think that there have to be consequences of beliefs. And I think sometimes people need a line drawn for them from the belief to the consequence of the belief. And so I walked over to them when it was over, and I said, "Are you okay?" And they said yes. And I said, there are consequences to defunding the authorities. There are consequences to this. And they looked at me like I was evil. Just another very, very quick story. I was outside. I had to go into a grocery store. This is months ago. I'm out of the U.S. most of the year, but I had my dog in the car, and I had a sweater on. So I go in, and people in Portland, they're just easily identifiable if they're kind of woke crazies. So I went in, and I was in the store literally no longer than I don't even think I was in 5 minutes. Come back out, and this crazed woman was yelling at me for keeping the dog in the car. She's like, "I'm going to call the police. I'm going to call the police." I'm like, "Okay, the police have all been defunded. Go ahead, call the police." Did you want the police defunded? So there's a failure to grasp that ideas have consequences. And there's something so disturbing about that when it's in a democracy, right? Because we have nobody to blame for the situation but ourselves. We could go down many rabbit holes, but the United States is just printing money. We're just printing money.
Yeah. We are doing the same. We are doing the same here, and it's gotten to the point where there's now a major bank in Australia who is now no longer dealing with cash. They're just like, nah, no more cash. And you start to think, okay, why are you dealing with no more cash? Is it because you don't have any? Is it just it's all gone and you're just playing with pretend money? It's funny, like the defund the police side of things, because you look at it from my perspective. I live in a very relatively lovely neighbourhood. There's a bit of crime because people go to certain neighbourhoods and they break into houses. And here in Australia right now, it's very much and maybe this is what I was talking about before. Young people don't seem to be scared. 14, 15-year-olds, they don't seem to be scared about getting arrested. They know that the police can't do anything, so they'll break into houses. They're not taking anything but the car keys to go and drive the car away and burn it out. They don't really care about anything else. They're not going in there to hurt people. They're just trying to steal cars. And the whole idea of defunding police is so foreign to most Australians, I think, except unless you're the very left-leaning Australians who are probably right for it. But where does that idea come from? Because it's not like everyone came up with that idea immediately. It has to be, it's like what Gard Sard talks about, these idea pathogens, those type of things.
Okay, so if you'll give me like 3 minutes, I'll explain the genesis of the idea. So the idea, and this percolates out of the academies, the idea is that, well, there are many ideas, but one is that any disparity in outcome among racial groups is due to systems. And so we have a problem. So the goal then should be to dismantle systems. And we can see that in language. So for example, minoritize, from minority to minoritize. The system makes a minority. Everything is the system. The system makes a minority. I have a series on this I did, Woke in Plain English. From bums, which I don't know if you had that word over there, but when I was a kid, you used to call homeless people bums. From bums, which is an evaluation of a person, and inherent in that is that they're lazy. It's called a thick description. To homeless, which is a description without an evaluation. To houseless. And houseless is the idea that the system is responsible for these people not having houses. So where did the idea of defund the police come from? So on the left, which has captured virtually every institution in the United States, particularly they dominate academic institutions. The idea is that capitalism is bad, systems are at fault, systems are inherently racist, patriarchal, misogynistic, and discriminatory. And it's the police that keeps the capitalist system in place. So if we can destabilize the police, we have an opportunity to bring down the capitalist system and thus bring fairness and equity, not equality, equity. So among the main targets are the police. So that's the basic idea. I can flesh it out from there, but that's the basic idea.
We have a vote coming up in Australia to change our constitution. It's called The Voice. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. But basically the whole idea is to give Indigenous Australians not only representation, but to list them in the Constitution, which I think is a fantastic idea. They should be in the Constitution. They should be recognised as the first people. Beautiful. But a lot of people have the issue with having a group being not elected but chosen to represent all of these people. And that's sort of ruined that part of the referendum that's coming up for a lot of people, including Indigenous people. They're like, well, why are we having a group of people chosen to represent us? Couldn't you have a vote? Couldn't you have several different options that would make a lot more sense? But I think it has a lot to do with attacking that attacking the structure that has been set up over 200 or so years. Okay, we've got this constitution here. Let's go in there and change this important part. And I believe it's important to have them represented. But they're changing it in a way that no one really agrees with. But there are a huge group of people that go, well, because it is a topic of race, we need to agree with it. It's the same with defunding the police. Even though if you think about it logically, it's a terrible decision to try and defund a group that is protecting people. We need to change. We need to defund them because this structure of oppression is based around us, or based around them, or at least that's how we feel. And it's the same with the government here in Australia. Aboriginal people, a lot of left-leaning people feel like they are still very oppressive, and we need to change it. And people are scared to voice their opinions about this voice vote. And my worry is, even though it seems like a good idea from the outset, people just won't talk about it. They'll just do it because they feel like if they dare disagree, then they'll be in a lot of trouble. People will think about them differently. And it seems to be a slippery slope because then what comes after that? It seems like that's sort of how we're facing that particular decision here in Australia. Although it is a beautiful thing to do, recognise Indigenous people, it's what comes with that. Like my thought on The Voice, and I haven't really spoken about it publicly, was we have a lot of, I don't know if you've ever seen the map of Indigenous populations throughout Australia. It's enormous. There are so many different languages and cultures built into that culture. Why wouldn't you have a representative from every one of those places come together and perhaps choose someone to represent your people? I know it's strange to change, and it's strange to have a group. It's strange to have people divided by race, is what I'm saying. But if that's what you really, really want, then isn't that a fairer way to do it?
Okay, so I'm going to push back on that, but I'm going to push back in this sense that I'm completely aware that I'm an American, and I'm not. This isn't like I'm trying to like have some kind of weird neo-colonial hegemony over Australia or anything. It's not clear to me why, you said a couple of times it's a beautiful thing or a good thing. It's not clear to me why acknowledging the quote unquote First Peoples or whatever the term is that's in Australia, it's not clear to me why that's a good thing.
Okay. So I think it's a nice thing to do, I feel, because for Indigenous people here in Australia, they were treated basically as fauna. That's how they were listed, and to have them listed as and I cop a lot of shit. I've made jokes about Aboriginal people on stage, and right now I'm before the Human Rights Commission here in Australia because of the joke that I made, even though it was a normal joke. One lady complained, I now have to travel to Brisbane and get legal representation because of humour on stage, which is outrageous. But I still, my genuine thoughts on Aboriginal people is they should be represented. They should be, and they are represented in Parliament. There is several people in Parliament in Australia who have been chosen by the people, and I guess that's people's argument. There are people representing Indigenous people. So why do we need this whole other group that isn't elected? It is chosen. By who is it chosen?
That's my question. Does that contradict or supersede the democratic structures that you have in place?
Well, yeah, it does. Absolutely, it does.
Okay, so now, why would other people will thing? Why would being nice override that?
So my thought is it's nice to say that they are the first people. It should be in the Constitution, and that's where it ends.
Yeah, I'm going to push back again.
Please. I'm interested
because people aren't having these. They aren't having these debates, and you are either on the side of yes or you're on the side of no. There is no in between. And that's what this is important. This is what this podcast series is about, is fleshing out ideas.
Yeah, and I think that this podcast series is extremely important because we're not doing that in the university system. So I can't speak. I was there for a month and I met with deans and I met with many, many people, think tanks, and this is just parenthetical before I get to the point. You're about a year behind, maybe a little more, and in terms of a woke takeover, the complete takeover of the institutions. But getting back to this idea that it's my fear is that once you do that, it's a slippery slope, and there will be certain entitlements. So people will think, oh, well, we're the first people, or we're Native peoples, or we're acknowledging the Constitution, and thus, boom, fill in the blank, and therefore, boom, fill in the blank. Well, I would say both yes and no. The no would be and therefore nothing. And the yes would be yes. You are absolutely entitled to equal rights, equal privileges, equal representation as absolutely everybody else. And my concern is that when you start doling out special treatment for people because of some quirk of chronology that they were just here beforehand, that we would use that as an excuse to supersede democratic institutions and to override the traditional structures that we know work and ensure rights for all people. Nobody should have more rights than anybody else. So I'm concerned about that as a bracketed statement. And then the second thing is I'm also concerned democracy doesn't function well when people don't speak freely or feel they can't speak freely. And so if anybody is listening to this, here's what I have to say to you. if you're afraid to speak freely and openly and honestly about this, one of the reasons that you should, it's because your life will be better. It's because the relationships you'll have with people will be more sincere and more genuine, because they'll know who you are, because they won't have a relationship with the things they think you believe. They'll have a relationship with what you actually believe. And only in that way can you have an authentic and genuine relationship. So that's the second thing I have to say about that.
So I think where I'm coming from is purely emotional, and maybe that is a problem. It's the emotion of, and this is what I've always tried to sort of get across, is I love the idea of ingraining Aboriginal culture into how people who my ancestors were born in Scotland and Ireland. And I love the idea that we all have ownership of Australia just as much as anyone else who's born here, regardless of what colour they are, whether their family's from India, Pakistan, wherever. I like the idea, and I really want to push that, where we all buy into it. We buy into the beautiful stories and the culture, the food, maybe not the food, but all the other things. And I think that's a beautiful... Yeah, the coffee. It's all a part of what we are, and we can all talk shit about each other. We can all laugh. We can all joke, and this is a lot of people's fear, is that the voice will be a racial divide. And on that, what you said about including them in the Constitution based on choosing a race to include just them, and then it's all about there's one section that puts, I don't know what to say segregates, but picks out a race, and then we're going to talk about that. Or we're going to talk about them in this part of the Constitution. Does it do that about Caucasian people? Okay, well, do we need to do that about Caucasian people? Do we then need to go and talk about, after World War II, how many people from Eastern Europe came over here, or from Europe in general? Where does that end? I don't know. I think it's a nice thing to, maybe it doesn't need to be in the Constitution at all. It's a nice thing to really understand the culture and understand what built the land and the stories, and because they have important. It's much more important than religion, and we learn religion in school. It's much more important to learn about how Aboriginal people understood simply how to move around, be nomadic people, all those types of things. Like, that is everyone in this country's history, and we should learn about it. We should know about it, and we should respect it.
I think I agree with you in large measure. I think what you said was sound. My disagreement is, I think we need to be careful of the impulse to be nice, especially when you want to institutionalize niceness in any kind of a policy context.
Because where does it end?
Yeah, where does it end, and why would you want to be nice at all? Like, isn't it more important to be fair or just or forthright in your speech? I mean, there are many values that we could forward before niceness. So I think that it's more, and yeah, there is a remarkable diversity. I don't know if you follow this at all, but Jerry Coyne, the evolutionary biologist who wrote Why Evolution is True, he's been writing about this. I published a paper a while ago about the importance of merit in science. And one thing that I found deeply disturbing, and I think I could be totally wrong about this. I think this is where the impulse of nice leads. The impulse of nice leads to a misplaced egalitarianism. In other words, affording dignity to ideas that don't deserve dignity. People deserve dignity. Ideas don't deserve dignity. And the example I'm thinking of is the hot thing right now in New Zealand is Maori ways of knowing. And people want to include Maori ways of knowing into quantum physics. Okay, no, that's just insane. There's just hard stop, no. And so I think that we all have the impulse. It's far better, by the way, to have an impulse to be kind than it is to have an impulse to be nice. And I think that impulse to be nice leads people to believe things that are untethered to reality. Like, oh, maybe the Maori have some kind of contribution to make to quantum physics. No, they have no contribution. They have many contributions in diverse cultures that should be read and studied and looked at with an open mind. And maybe, the rituals I've seen, the rituals on the before the football stadiums. Holy shit, those things are intense.
Yeah, the haka, yeah.
Yeah, the haka, but that doesn't mean that translates into anything objective about the nature of reality.
Absolutely. And it's the same. Sorry.
No. The funny thing is, me saying that doesn't make me a dick. Right? Me saying this doesn't mean I'm hard-hearted. It doesn't mean I'm not a nice person. It doesn't mean. All it means is I think that there are certain things that we need to rely upon what science yields, right? We fly planes, we have phones, we have telecommunications, and we can't let our feelings about things influence the way the world is as studied by the best tools of science. And I know that makes me seem, this Boghossian, he's a jerk. But no, it's not about being a jerk. It's about saying what's true and thinking through ideas, even if those ideas are at least initially unpalatable to people.
I had a question, and I'll just quickly finish up on the voice thing. At the end of the day, all of this money that's being spent on this promotion, like millions and millions of dollars, should be spent on Indigenous people in remote areas. Like, these people can't access hospitals, they can't access healthcare. Like, mate, these people who are there, like, there's dry communities where they're not allowed to smuggle alcohol in. Like, doesn't that tell you that there's an issue there, that they need assistance? Anyway, that's where this money, these millions of dollars, should be spent, not trying to make a tiny change to the Constitution. I was going to ask you a question about.
Can I comment on that first?
Please, yes, of course.
Okay. So I think that the way to look through this, the lens to think about this problem is equality of opportunity. So you would need to look at those schools. I would suggest that a far better use of that money would be spent, as the philosopher John Rawls says, giving everybody a public education at the first rate, giving everybody up to, you probably have a very, very good healthcare. I tell Australians how much I pay for healthcare. They have a heart attack. You know how much I pay? I pay almost $3,000 a month for healthcare and dental care.
What?
But, yeah, it's pretty, everybody has a heart attack. So, but you'd be better.
Dude, mate, no one paid. Well, you can get private health here. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But I think that the way to look at that problem is to give everybody the opportunity so that they can succeed, independent of how wealthy their parents are, what their ethnic origin is. I think that's the liberal principle that we ought to adhere to, as opposed to kind of jerry-rigging on the back end. And any attempt to jerry-rig on the back end, whether it's affirmative action or proportional representation, any of that stuff will not solve the disparities that people are trying to solve. Because you're right, there are disparities, but those disparities are solved by giving everybody equality of opportunity, and it starts with education and healthcare. And that's the last thing I had to say.
But that doesn't win people elections. Perhaps that's the issue that we're facing here. It's all more people win an election based on promises rather than action in this circumstance.
Yeah, then that's always the fault of the electorate, right? That's the fault of in democratic systems. That's the fault of the people. So that there's something wrong with the system. Although I have to say, in comparison to our system, your system looks pretty good.
It's just less people. It's just less people. That's all it is. I was going to ask you, and I've been talking to my wife a lot about several different subjects in around, gender theory, in around the V word with certain medicines, and that I won't say on YouTube, and things like that. This idea that you have to be in a camp. And I wonder, I'm not a religious person. I was an atheist for a long time. I now consider myself sort of agnostic because the universe keeps expanding and there's 100 million different universes out there, and fuck, I don't know. I'm certainly not, I don't subscribe to any of the major religions and I never have. Do you think because of the reduction in people who find themselves or describe themselves as religious, who buy into religion and the teachings, do you think that's why more people are being woke? More people are being far right. More people are being right wing, left wing, and they need something desperately to believe in, to hold, and to belong to. And without religion, and maybe this is why religion developed to the point where it was, without religion, they are lost and they're desperate to find something else.
I can't tell you how happy I am that you asked me that question. I've been thinking about that for quite a while, and I've been just talked to my podcast guest today about it. I talked to Richard Dawkins about it, interviewed him. I've been obsessed with this question for a long time. So thank you so much for asking it. It's vital. That question, the fact that you even asked that question, it's like the cutting edge of what is I don't want to say defining the culture war, but it's on the cutting edge of the culture war. So that's called the substitution hypothesis. So the substitution hypothesis is this idea that if you ever watch Game of Thrones, you ever watch Game of Thrones?
Yeah. Well, this is a jiu-jitsu shirt, but I put it on for you. But I do watch Game of Thrones as well.
Oh, you do jiu-jitsu too? We should talk about that.
Mate, I'm a white belt with 3 stripes, and I haven't done it since I had a son. So,
okay. Well, we'll get back to that in a second. So that's very topic of conversation. My jiu-jitsu is one of my obsessions. Science fiction is my other obsession. I only have 2 obsessions. There you go. So, and wokeism, of course, an obsession, but it's an obsession I want to kill eventually. Unlike my other 2 obsessions, I want to keep nurturing. So as the only reason people started believing in the new gods is because they stopped believing in the old gods. So the substitution hypothesis is the idea that belief is the default and we need something to believe in. And is it a necessary condition of human experience that we will just believe whatever is either the current orthodoxy or morally fashionable? My tendency is to think that that's not the case, but I'm not sure of that. When I asked Richard Dawkins that, he said if that were true, his whole life would have been a waste. His whole professional life would have been a waste. So what's interesting to me is if you look, the canary in the coal mine was the atheist and the skeptical movements. So within those quote unquote communities, I don't like that word, it's overused, a new religion grew within those communities, those conferences, an absolute obsession with trans issues, an obsession with race, and particularly gender, less so race. So I don't know the answer to your question. I don't think anybody does. I think it's speculation. I've asked intellectual historians that if there's a kind of necessity there for when belief in one orthodoxy falls, if the natural tendency is to just cling to another orthodoxy. So I don't know the answer to the question.
You do seem to find people turn their lives around when they find something to really dig their teeth into, whether it's jiu-jitsu or the gym or whatever. That becomes all they talk about, all they think about. They're dreaming about it at night, and maybe even for Richard Dawkins, if I can think for him. Obviously, he's a great intellectual, but maybe he has bought in like his ingrained religious way of thinking. Obviously, you have to replace that word for people in his position. Is to follow the lines of atheism, or is to follow the thinking.
Yeah, for Dawkins, a wonder in science. So I'm amazed how many people. So I've been doing jiu-jitsu for a very long time through pandemics, surgeries, everything. And when I first started, it was a lower class activity. It was a strictly class based. And I've watched it evolve. Now it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Everybody's doing it. A lot of wealthy, affluent, older men. I can't even possibly tell you the number of people I meet on a daily basis who have purple belts in jiu-jitsu. My lawyer's husband, my lawyers, like everybody, like I'll just meet somewhere. I was at my daughter's softball game. Like 3 of the guys there had purple belts in jiu-jitsu, all white, all middle class. But it's interesting. It's an interesting phenomenon. You got to get back to the gym. I also took time. Well, I took time off from MMA when my son was born, and I called I was in Hungary, I've been in Hungary for 4 months last year. I did jiu-jitsu. I have this amazing, I go around, every tour I go around the world, I bring my gi and I train with people. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating community. But before I go down that deep hole, which I don't want to go down to, because if I start talking about science fiction or jiu-jitsu, I can't stop myself. But I have noticed that, like in the very beginnings of diets, for example, people tend to be very fanatic, and the very beginnings of religion in particular. And so there is something that people tend to grip onto, or grasp onto. I don't think, and I've seen that even with like at Comic-Cons, like costumes or the Marvel universe or what have you. So what's interesting to me, what I've been thinking about, and I'll give you another one that I think, and I hope we don't have to. I got a little voice in the back of my head saying, "Don't say this, don't say this," but I'm going to tell you. I'm going to say it anyway. I am fairly convinced at this point. Now, watch this whole interview. This is the only thing you're going to get comments about. I am fairly convinced at this point that belief. I can't believe how widespread in the U.S. it is in aliens, that the government has found alien craft. I think that this is a mass delusion. It's a culture-bound syndrome among fairly well-educated, fairly affluent people. The number of people who not only believe this, but who ascribe incredibly high degrees of confidence to this based on nothing but alleged testimony or testimonies of people. And I only mention that because I think it's another example of the phenomenon that we're discussing here. People just have this need. They have the need for community. They have the need to belong. They have the need to believe. And so there is something tried and true and tested about traditional religions, Abrahamic religions. There's something like, we're here today, even the most strident atheists, except Hitchens, for example, we have to give some kind of a nod to say that those Judeo-Christian values broadly, and it's not, of course, there were horrific, egregious, horrific, terrible things against gay people and Galileo, et cetera. But yeah, they pretty much got us to the point in civilization where we are now. And now we have a bunch of lunatics running around who want to destroy the whole system. They want to rip everything down. They want to defund the police. They want to dismantle and disrupt. They want to make these enterprise zones chasses. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question. I do think that you're right in that some kind of, and Michael Shermer talks about this, belief is the default state. And the question is, should, for example, atheists just step out of the way and let people believe more benign delusions, like people walking on water, what have you? Because it's clear to me now that this idea that I used to have, that I was wrong. I was wrong that I believe that if we could just take away some superstitions, rationality and reason, and we would like flourish as a society. But that's just not true. Now we have a bunch of people running around thinking men can get pregnant. And it's not a definitional thing either, or that, men should be in women's sports, or, or children should be given puberty blockers or given surgeries or some, to quote unquote change their sex, which is not possible anyway, and they become lifelong medical patients. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm past the point of concern and into the realm of worry at this point.
Yeah, the conversation about trans people is something that I've made a lot of videos on, and I always try to take it from a bit of a humorous point of view, but I only really get serious when it comes to prescribing children hormone blockers, trying to stop puberty. As I said, I've just had a young son, and the idea of harming him in a way at 9, 10 years old that's going to drastically affect his life and hurt him, just because I am fearful of what other people will say. And I've, since having a little man, my wife and I, we've heard what, and like Instagram communities and communities that we've been involved in, people's beliefs about what you should do with a whole range of different things is so strong. And if you fall into the community where, hey, if your little boy starts playing with dolls and then starts displaying characteristics that you would associate with a female or a little girl, then he having that option all of a sudden changes the whole conversation, because you're no longer just going, oh, he's just he likes doing little things that girls like doing, and that's there's no issue with that. That study that happened, I think it was from the late 80s into the 90s, where they went back and had a look at the amount of people who displayed gender dysphoric tendencies, and then looked at them another 10, 15 years later, and the vast majority turned out to no longer have those gender dysphoric tendencies. Most of them were gay. And I think that's still true. I mean, there can't be this autistic line in the sand. Yeah, and autism's another one, which I think is, I've got an autistic brother, so it's a funny one for me, because I really do feel the autism spectrum. There has to be other words for autism, because my brother can't look after himself. He can't talk. He's in his mid-20s, and he's only just really started feeding himself. And then there's people who are who have Asperger's, or they've been diagnosed autism by one of their mates at the pub or whatever. Well, they probably wouldn't be at the pub. Far too loud. But I think this whole conversation about trans people, and they're valid, 100%, still valid, but you can still disagree with giving kids hormone blockers, even if you think their lives are still valid. I think that parents are being almost bullied into doing these things, which is only going to then affect that generation. And then will they do the same, or will they turn back against the previous generation? I guess that's sort of what we'll have to wait and see.
Well, that gets back to your earlier point, is that we have to be able to have conversations about this, and we have to be able to have conversations without recrimination or fear that, oh boy, I'm told constantly I'm on the wrong side of history. There's something particularly sinister and dastardly about doing that to children. There's just something that's, I had an interview with Helen Joyce, and this was like a huge learning moment for me. I can't believe I didn't think of this before, but I was always operating under the assumption that 0.06% of people were trans. In other words, it's like a human non-fluctuation. It's just like this built-in thing. Even though I had evidence, I read that repeatedly from people I trusted. And there's no way to test that. Now we go to the quote unquote lived experience of people, but with kids that changes all the time. And as you said, the percentage, I had a conversation with Andrew Doyle, percentage of people who are gay is basically sterilizing gay kids who are largely autistic. But Helen Joyce told me, she wrote the book Trans. She's Irish. She lives in England, author. She told me that the number isn't 0.06%. The number is 0. It's all a contagion. So I used to believe that anything above 0.06 was a contagion. Like people just thought it was a good idea. Like my daughter's friends have told me that people pretend at her school to be trans so they'll fit in, right? So anything above 0.06, so their entire counties, entire departments in some place in California, I can try to find the study if you want, that up to 20% of people self-described as trans. And if you look at Brown University, the percentage of people self-describing as gay or bisexual is well over half. So I used to think that's a contagion, but she said, no, the whole thing is a culture bound syndrome. Like all of it, the whole thing is just, there's no there. And it was remarkable to me that I never considered that before.
I'm trying to remember the lady's name who wrote there's a young girl on the front of the cover, a cartoon version about transgender ideology affecting young women. She was on my podcast too. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but a very interesting book, and talks about a wide range of topics to do with this. But the one that really stuck out for me was the complete flip of how this affects people, what gender this affects. For the longest time, it was middle-aged men, and now all of a sudden it's young women.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And not only young women, but Katie Herzog told me years ago, she told an audience, I was in the audience, she said that she's a lesbian, she lives in Seattle. There are her femme lesbian friends are complaining that there are no butch or masculine lesbians anymore. They've all transitioned over.
Right.
And I just found that fascinating. Like, wow, it's that common now. Oh, and my roommate is a lesbian, and she was sending me pictures of trans women, in other words, men pretending to be women, on the apps. That's the other thing we don't speak honestly about. Like every time I used to have to translate trans men or trans women, I used to translate the trans as just fake. And just to be clear, this has to be said in every one of these conversations, I'm sick of it, but I believe these people are entitled to every right to pursue the lives they want to lead, to do anything that they want. They're entitled to equal opportunity. They shouldn't be discriminated against. I got it.
Yeah.
I've said that a million times.
Please continue with your violent speech.
Yeah. But seriously, we do have to be careful though, because YouTube censored the Peterson conversation with Helen Joyce, YouTube has censored many conversations. And so, that's the other. So not only can we not speak, you can't speak honestly in the university, but you can't even have an honest conversation on YouTube because you could be censored. So you have the tech, you have an kind of a structure in place to prevent anyone who dissents from the orthodoxy from speaking honestly. It's a huge problem.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the new misinformation and disinformation laws that are coming into Australia here. They're confronting, and that's a whole nother conversation. But basically, it's only going to get worse. YouTube, Google, they will just go, okay, whatever. I don't want to pay a fine. This is ridiculous. Right. This has happened in Australia before. They don't want to deal with this shit. They've got way too much cash coming in. They don't want to deal with us, bloody down under people whinging and complaining about what we're talking about. So they'll just cut it. They'll just go, fuck off. And that's just so, to then, only the conversations we're allowed to hear are the ones that are allowed in universities, which are all far left leaning, which are all running along this woke ideology, which I hate the term woke. I think it was great at the start, but now everyone sort of switches off when someone uses it. When you say, oh, that person, they're so woke or whatever, people go, oh yeah, you must love Trump, you're a right-wing, hate gay people, all that type of stuff. I'm always surprised by all of these conversations, and the young people too. I had this young woman on my podcast a few years ago. She now has basically, even though she knows what type of person I am, my wife is, and the family we are, has cut all ties because she was copying too much shit from other people. She's a large social media influencer, and she said that I made a video about trans people being pregnant, or trans men being pregnant, and I said that's not a thing, that's a woman. That's the general consensus of the video, and she got quite angry at me and said the science is changing. And it is that quote that it just always sticks with me, that you can be so dishonest with yourself or not have the ability to think clearly that you would suggest to someone that science is changing to the point where men can have babies. But that's just madness. It's just absolute madness. But this is the lives that people are living in. And the same thing is being seen on TikTok. I don't have a TikTok presence because I keep getting taken down. Anytime I criticize anyone to do with anything in woke ideologies, I get taken down. I think I had 600,000 followers, got it taken down. Then I got to 100, taken down. Now I'm at 70. I've had 3 strikes. So it's all fucked. But
we have 2 strikes on TikTok, and so that's the kind of ethical thing when you're a content creator that you have to think about. Well, if we put out the content that we want people to hear about, and the content that I believe we got a strike for, I'm really happy you said that because I've been thinking about that. The content we got a strike for was somebody else saying that some of the problems with kids transitioning, specifically, you really do become a lifelong medical patient. Like it's a very serious problem. We got taken down for that. So if you put out mediocre content, then you're being inauthentic, but then you're not reaching people at all. So it's a problem when you're a content creator, but it does speak to the fact that big tech, I don't want to say is in on it because it sounds like a conspiracy, but big tech, all of this stuff comes from the universities. It's all from the universities. It's all fringe departments have spread their poison as metastasized throughout, and they're capable of, and then those people who are indoctrinated, they go into administrative and leadership positions. So the missions of those universities, the missions of those institutions like the ACLU, and you don't have that over the American Civil Liberties Union or the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, they say the same, but the people who discharge the missions, they change. They fundamentally change because they've been subject to woke ideology. And part of the thing is when you've been indoctrinated into woke ideology, you by design do not know the other side of the issue. Like you've never even heard arguments to the contrary. So you're a really good foot soldier, right? You're a foot soldier. So the problem is now that we're largely losing the culture war, although I think the tide is turning. We're losing the culture war in terms of total institutional. They don't have the Supreme Court, and they by and large don't have the police departments, but the woke ideology has pretty much taken over every institution in American society. Corporations. And what's super interesting is it's even overridden, which you wouldn't think would happen in a capitalist system, it's even overridden financial concerns, for example, when making movies, right? They're more concerned about, this is how you know you're in trouble. When the primary mission of a corporation is to make, a for-profit corporation is to make money. Friedman has this thing: social responsibility of business is to discharge, is to increase its profits. But you're in trouble when it's switched from that to promoting these trans messages or these gender messages or these incredibly divisive racial messages. So how do you fight that? I mean, it's a huge problem. And again, I am quite confident that you're about a little more than a year behind in Australia, and then this shit is really going to hit the fan.
Which worries me as a comedian. I always try and talk about subjects that are not kosher, and I always like pressing the taboo angle on jokes. And for me, this whole thing that's happening with the Human Rights Commission in Australia, that one lady can complain and that compels me to change the way I speak. Like, where does that end? Because it doesn't, because it's the what's protected is, okay, race, religion, gender, and it goes on. But why would you not be able to complain about an Islamic comedian making jokes about Christianity? What precedent does this set? And I had a lot of feedback. Not one major news source or media source ran this story, which I thought was absolutely mad. But a few other, online publications did. And people couldn't believe, I was getting messages from everywhere, people couldn't believe that I was literally being brought to another state and what this lady wanted. She wanted me to receive training and apologise.
Correct.
And so training in what? I'm telling jokes. These aren't real. I don't believe these things. This is pretend. So that's where we're at. And as you said, a year and a half, we'll be there. Well, we're in certain portions of the country, we're there.
I'd like to answer the question that you asked, because I think it's so incredibly important. Where does it end? I'll tell you where it ends. It's not just that they want to control your speech or that they want an apology. Yes, they certainly want those things, but that's not what they're after. They're after your cognitive liberty. They're after your freedom and ability to think. They want you to think like they do. They are ideologues who are absolutely convinced they have the right answers to moral questions. And any people who disagree with them, it's not that they're just wrong. It's either that they're bad people or that they're existential threats. So that's what they're looking for from you. They want to rob you of your cognitive liberty. And just to be clear about this, almost everybody who is subject to this or is somewhat themselves on the left. Like they're like Tucker Carlson, for example, is pre-cancelable. Like he can't be canceled. James Lindsay is no longer cancelable. Like you can't do this to people on the right. Dawkins, I've never voted for Republican in my life, literally never. I endorsed Andrew Yang last election. I've never even voted for a Republican. I don't think I voted for a Republican at a local level, but yet I'm constantly called right winger. I'm constantly called a Nazi and a fascist and a bigot and a homophobe. And if we were off air, I would tell you some things that you'd be like, okay, this dude is not a homophobe. But so the idea that's so, well, I'll just tell you since I threw that out. So I have 2 kids and they're both gay. So the idea that I am some kind of a homophobe is completely insane. But again, the fact that we give these people any credence at all is the problem. The fact that we even, and this is where what I want to say to your listeners in Australia, me being in America and in Portland ahead of the curve, you simply cannot listen to these people. If you look, think about it like this. If you, I don't know how to fly a plane, right? So if you wouldn't accept my advice on how to fly a plane, why would you accept my criticism? Why would you? But there is one problem. The problem is that everybody needs a kind of corrective to the stuff that they think, right? Everybody needs, well, what about this? Or have you thought about this? Or let me play devil's advocate about this. The problem is that there's just so much static that the signal to noise ratio isn't correct. You have, I don't even know how many people with their fake accounts and they're not playing by the rules of engagement. They have multiple, I have like, I don't even know how many people it is who just constantly go on my channel or go wherever and harass me, or, I mean, it's just, you just cannot listen to these people. But yet we do need some kind of correctives. So I would suggest it's not optimal getting correctives from people you respect who are your friends, as opposed to people. The idea would be to find people with whom you disagree and ask them why, and then, you know, have them in your friend circle. But that's almost not possible, because the ideology will seek to maintain itself. The woke ideology is particularly dangerous because it has like these built-in features to prevent anything that would possibly dislodge the ideology. I'm telling you, this is a serious, people don't understand how serious of a threat this is.
And that's where I think the connection to religion comes in, because these people treat it like a religion. It's doctrine. It's not, oh, maybe there's a different way to look at it. No, this is what is written. This is what I've learned. Therefore, it is absolute truth. You know, I think more people who are classified as right-wing but probably sit somewhere in the middle are so much more open to different ideas. Like, obviously, the further you go right, probably not. But the further you go left, definitely not. Like, they just will not accept an outside point of view, and they'll use those terms: racist, sexist, homophobic, etc.
And the fact that you say that does not make you a right-wing person. Right? The fact that you just said that to me, people say, oh, this guy's on the right. Fuck this guy. No, you're pointing out, just because a feature of derangement is found on the left or on the right, it doesn't mean that it has to be found in equal measure on the other side.
The same goes for people like Joe Rogan. Like, he gets labelled as, I've made a video on this exact subject, and I went through and listed all the things he said that puts him squarely, well, left-ish, you know. Yeah. Like, there's so many things that make him left-ish. And yet, if he dares questions certain mandates put out by the government about a medical thing that I won't mention, if he dares say anything about trans people, if he dares talks about, oh, well, you know what, you know, Trump, I like Trump about this, but I don't like this. Like, even entertaining these ideas, talking to people like anyone in the, I'm trying to skip around saying anyone's name.
Don't say
because that'll just, yeah. But
it's a shame you
just
have to do that. Yeah.
Oh, it's madness. Like, I have been putting out videos on my channel that are censored, and I put out like the full version on Patreon until that eventually gets taken down too. But that's just crazy. Like, that I have to censor certain words because that we aren't allowed to talk about that because it's not the correct directive given to us by the powers that be. Madness. And as you said, it's a slippery slope. It keeps getting worse until the point where all the people in government have gone through the universities, and then this woke ideology is not only a popular thing, it is law. And that is, I guess, everyone's fear.
Yeah. So, you know, what they did to you, so they wanted you to receive some kind of training, and they wanted you to apologize. Well, first of all, so you may be in a unique position that you can ask them questions and that they'll have to respond. That would be wonderful, because the first question I would ask is this belief falsifiable? Is there a way to show that this belief could be proven to be false? You know, what is it that differentiates this from a religion? I would love to ask this person questions. The problem is that at some point, you know what's going to happen, right? You know it's going to happen, and that's just going to be, oh, that's what every fascist would say, or, you know, they'll just go back to the talking points. Because the worst evil, if you will, to import a word from religion, is this idea of bigotry or what have you. And if she's seen as being soft on you, then her tribe will take that out on her. So it's another kind of communal mechanism to enforce the derangement syndrome.
Yeah, it's worrying, because now I go into my next tour next year and I'm writing for it now, and I think of something that's fucked up and I go, geez, you know, I've got a baby now. Do I really want to do all this? There's so many venues in this country that I've been banned from Canberra University, Wollongong University, all these like places are just like, no, this fascist cannot come here. He made a joke about Jewish people 4 years ago, and I look at that and I go, mate, I'm from Newcastle. I don't know any Jewish people. I don't understand why anyone doesn't like Jewish people. Why? I still don't get it. So it's a whole thing, mate, and I know you are it just doesn't end. Like the further you go down this rabbit hole, and that's why I'm very lucky that I can switch off from doing, what I consider work as YouTube videos and whatnot. I'm very lucky I can switch off, because without that, I would be obsessed with this shit, and I'd be fighting with people on Twitter, and you can't change people's minds, and I don't want to. If you want to watch the videos, if you want to listen to the podcast, fantastic. If not, fuck off.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I do. That's literally my day job, is to promote free speech and open inquiry and fight wokeism. Mike Nana, I don't know if you know Mike, he has a wonderful, his YouTube channel's Mike Nana, Nayna. He did the documentary, The Reformers, which was about when we published the fake papers. He has had a tremendous, listening to him, and I don't know if you know Rob Schneider, he's a good friend of mine, the American actor, and then listening to him, but it's terrible in comedy. And I hear this from my friends who are comedians. Brian Callum was telling me this, I don't know if you know who he is, but walking down the street with Brian is a trip. You literally can't even get a block. All these people mob you. It's really interesting to listen to them speak about what comedy has become, and I hate to say I get no joy in saying this to you, and I particularly because this is not in the United States, and I'd much rather be the guy who doesn't say this, but I am not particularly bullish on the United States. I'm not particularly. Just what has happened to this country recently is just so utterly heartbreaking. And even if I see that we've had a watershed moment, or we're starting to, I don't know, heal might not be the right word, we're starting to come to our senses, I still see the damage this has done to our institutions. And I still see these lunatics who are in control of the academies and in control of what were once vulnerable institutions and legacy media. The New York Times is basically, I don't know. I'm just not. I'm saddened, man. I'm actually heartbroken by the whole thing.
I think a lot of these, as you said, institutions, they're broken beyond repair. It's almost like we need to, start new universities and this type of stuff where you're allowed, like it's written into that university's or college's constitution that, hey, we encourage free speech here. We encourage 100%. That type of thing. But that's the only way to rebuild from this point.
So I'd like to talk about that, if that's okay. So there are two strains of thought on how to fight this. One is what I'm doing. So I'm a founding faculty member at the University of Austin. University of Austin is in Texas. We just did the Forbidden Courses program. And the idea is it's a new institution that's founded on truth, free speech, open dialogue. The admissions to the university are not based in race. It's pure meritocracy. And hey, to be very blunt with you, maybe the entire class will be Asian and Ashkenazi Jew. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know who's going to be. And if you look at the data on test scores, they're fascinating. I had a really interesting talk with Heather McDonald from the Manhattan Institute about standardized test scores. I don't think you have SATs or GREs over there, but it's fascinating. It's correlated. The ultimate correlation is I don't want to go too far down, but this is an interesting point. With income, and then the chart is broken down into various aspects of the not racially, but by country. Okay, so bracket that for a second. So you have one vein of thought that's just the way that you combat wokeism in institutions is that you build new institutions. So like Ralston College would be another one. So those are new academic institutions. Then you have to fight the legacy media like the New York Times and MSNBC and certainly NPR. You don't have NPR. ABC would be the analog. You need something like a Substack, which actually two Australians are, two of my the Rathbones are in California with Substack. So you have that. You have building alternative parallel media structures that people can go to. That's one way. The other thought is that you can reform traditional institutions. I don't think that's going to work. Chris Rufo, Ron DeSantis, who's running for president in Florida, he's the governor of Florida. Looks like he's around number 2 right after Trump, which is Trump-Biden runoff would be a catastrophe. But so Chris Rufo is a buddy of mine who's working with DeSantis to kick the DEI bureaucrats out, because you have a choice. You have free speech or you have the DEI bureaucrats. I like Chris. Chris is a friend of mine. I hope Chris succeeds. I don't know if Chris is going to succeed, but I am certainly not going to wait for Chris to succeed. So if you want to get out of the woke cesspool, if you want to avoid wholesale institutional capture, which is what we already have, ideological capture of, for example, universities, which are the engines of knowledge production, because I'm telling you, China does not have this problem. China is not woke. Then you're either going to have to kick these lunatics out or you're going to have to build new institutions. And as far as I can see, there's no middle ground. That's it.
I agree. There can't be a middle ground.
It can't be reasoned with because they don't agree with the principles of reason. They don't agree with dialogue, discourse, because they think that all those are white masculine concepts. They want everything decolonized. They don't play by the rules of engagement. I mean, so, someone says, well, that's fascistic or whatever. Well, look, if we had a bunch of people pushing Nazi race science, would you let them control the institution? No, of course you wouldn't let them control the institutions. So I am very, very, very I'm beyond sympathetic to what Chris is doing. I just don't know if it's going to work long term.
Peter, thank you very much for your time, brother. I appreciate it. It's been a fascinating conversation, mate. It's one of these things where everyone just sits here and just goes, and they just go, shit, like, what do you do? But I think we've had an insight in what people can do, and I think the number one takeaway is just don't listen to it. And I think a lot of people, most people, and this is the problem, I guess, we are preaching to the choir. The people who are watching this going, yeah, absolutely, completely agree. Hopefully it gets out to a few people.
I'm going to up it. I'm going to tell you exactly what you can do. If you're already agreeing, I'm going to tell you what we can do. You can speak openly and honestly, and you can be forthright in your speech. The Greeks have a word for this. It's called parrhesia, speaking truth in the face of danger. So you can speak against the orthodoxy and do not cringe or do not worry about people getting upset with you. Here's what you need to know. These people already hate you. They already hate you. They either hate you for an immutable characteristic which you possess, the color of your skin, etc., and they're going to hate you extra if you're gay or black or indigenous. So don't worry about these people's feelings. They are hostage to an invasive, you mentioned Gadsad, my buddy Gadsad, an ideology which has a parasitic, parasitized them. So you can speak openly and honestly, and you could be forthright, and you can be very blunt with people, whether that's the trans issue, and it doesn't matter what the issue is. And you can remember that it's not about whether this policy goes forward or this policy goes forward. It's about the fact that I'm an atheist. I believe that people have the right to believe anything they want. You want to believe a guy walked on water, flew to heaven on a winged horse. I don't believe any of those things. I think they're total nonsense. But if someone wants to believe that, they have the right to believe that. And we have to stick up for their right to believe things that we don't believe. But the deeper thing is you don't need any moral conviction to speak openly and honestly. All you need is the willingness to change your mind, because that's the one thing that woke people do not have. They do not have a disposition or a willingness to be honest and change their mind, particularly in a public context. So if you're willing to change your mind, change your opinion, revise your belief, it's all the more important that you speak openly and honestly. And if enough people do that, we can change it. And yes, you will lose friends, but I will suggest to you, those people were not your friends to begin with. They were not your friends. The quality of the engagements you have when you start speaking openly and honestly with people will skyrocket. So if you're already a believer, that's what I have to say to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can find all of Peter's stuff all over the internet, but I encourage you to check out his YouTube channel. The conversations you have out in public are fantastic, and this is exactly what we're talking about. So go and check out. All the links will be below. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the end? Anywhere people can find you? Anything else you're doing at the moment?
I'm on Twitter at Peter Boghossian, PeterBoghossin. The YouTube. I have a Substack. I'm fighting.
You're
I'm
everywhere.
fighting a culture war. Yeah, and I appreciate your support, having a conversation with me and talking. And even though things are, I don't want to sugarcoat it. Even though things are grim, it doesn't mean that things are going to stay grim or remain grim. The pendulum will swing the other way. We just have to make sure that when it swings the other way, we don't do to people what they did to us. We don't have like mass cancellations. We need kind of a truth and reconciliation here. Like we're not, the idea is not to look at people as enemies because they have different beliefs than us. The idea is to reinstate reason and rationality and democratic processes and open inquiry and free speech. And I think it's important to keep that in the forefront of your mind. So anyway, I appreciate your having me on, and I appreciate the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, brother.